All right, hello and welcome to what is basically a game of Civ 5 with a friend of mine that we've been doing the Catholic Gaming channel with for those Catholic Gaming commentaries. Back in the beginning of May, I started doing some rosary videos, and I thought it'd be a good idea because I've had one or at the very least people come along and comment about how they think they only need to. Well, they do only need to. Man, I'm bad at phrasing things. Basically, it was a Protestant that came along with some questions for Catholicism, and I thought that the best way, honestly, would probably be for an ex-Protestant that came to the fullness of Christ to possibly go over some of, kind of just like his beginnings, his background. That way we could figure out where he came from, as well as also just kind of a couple of common misconceptions that he had about the Catholic Church. So welcome, Michael.
Hello, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I'm glad to have you here. I was going to say, I know we've been trying to get this video going for a while, and it's been nobody's fault, but we're definitely getting it done now, aren't we?
Yeah, that is the intent today.
That is. I was going to say, between, that tree falling on my house along with the hard drive failing, it's definitely made it into a big problem, hasn't it?
Definitely, and a bunch of conflicting schedules and time zone differences have made this quite difficult to actually get together for various reasons.
That's true, and we've decided that we both really like Civ 5, so we figured that we would have just a nice relaxing game of Civ 5 with just the two of us in the game, while Michael went over, some basics about how he grew up, and then some common misconceptions, and then some things that after he has converted to the Catholic faith that might happen to help some other people. So I guess without further ado, Michael, would you like to go ahead and take over from there?
Of course. So just to give a bit of background on my faith, I was raised in the Protestant tradition, although not affiliated with any sort of denomination. So I guess you could put me in the evangelical column, really depending on how you wanted to define it.
Okay, that's fair.
But the other issue was that my church was organized more by ethnicity rather than actually by any sort of doctrinal lines, which is good and bad, for various reasons that we'll get into later.
Mm-hmm.
And so about when I first got to undergrad college, I had a very good friend of mine who was very much, an loud, out and proud Catholic, and we basically began talking. And at first, I thought, good for him, he's Catholic, whatever,
right?
And I think that eventually, as a result of how much of an optimist that he really was, and compared to my own native pessimism, that really was great for me to see that contrast. And I realize that a lot of Catholics may not necessarily have that, but for me, I always thought it was a good idea, and to at least check out what he personally thought, what his views were, and to get the sense that to move beyond some of my preconceptions about what Catholicism really was.
Sure, I was going to say.
And so,
go ahead.
Yeah, and so at age of 21, I seriously started thinking about it, and then after moving to Los Angeles to begin law school is when I really started by going to the RCIA program at here in Los Angeles, and it was only after that that I became fully initiated into the Catholic Church this past Easter of 2017. So I had been baptized before, but this was basic confirmation and first Eucharist for me.
Right, and that makes sense. Out of curiosity, since you did bring up RCIA while we were on it, I know that some people have had mixed reactions to RCIA, just depending on, I suppose, the church that they happen to go to. How was your RCIA formation? Because I know some people think that they happen to baby it down for people that have no clue about religion whatsoever. So I'm just kind of curious from your standpoint what you thought of it.
Yeah, I understand. So, Kevin, the church that I went to was very much a university church.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit of an accelerated RCIA program because, as I understand it, RCIA generally tends to take a fair bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
I think some parishes it's up to 2 years, I believe.
I believe so.
Mine was actually condensed to about 8 months, and that helped, I think, in making it feel like less of a slog.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, especially as someone who was kind of already familiar with the faith in some instances, there was definitely that little bit of feeling like, hey, I think I kind of already know who Jesus is.
Hmm.
I kind of already know what his crucifixion represents. But it was important for me to go back over that because there are, you know, minor differences, uh, and the big ones too, which things like the importance of Mary, for example,
Mm.
the
Yes.
importance of uh, the importance of confession, and how we are in the church as opposed to in Protestantism, for example. So
Right. I can understand that. Those are all definitely very big points that I'd like to get back to. I do want to just ask you a base question, though, since I know that
yes,
you talked about this for RCA a little bit. Would you think that it would be a good idea then if they happen to make two different types of RCI groups? One for people that have come into the Catholic faith with at least some knowledge, read their way into the Catholic faith, have this knowledge, and one for people that do happen to have very little knowledge? Or do you think that it's a better idea to have them together? That way they don't feel segregated for later. And then, go ahead.
I feel like it would be important to have it all be together, even though the overachiever in me does feel like yes, it would be better in some instances for there to be a advanced class, but I feel like that
Mm-hmm.
would just lead to divisions and people wanting to be in the advanced class and whatnot, and there will be some tensions
I
as a
could
result from that.
I could see
So
that, kind of like the Gentiles and the Jews, I suppose, that we saw in Acts, correct? A little bit.
right,
Yeah.
and I think it's very very we had, the church already has an uphill battle. The last thing you want to do is to foster a sense of you are already better off than people who haven't done anything in the first place, who have not grown up in the faith tradition that others have. So
No, I can definitely understand that. So, because I know that we said we'd touch on it a little bit later, and I am definitely interested in hearing more about how you grew up if you wanted. But just since I know that Mary is such a big topic, honestly, to a lot of Protestants and even to some Catholics, honestly, would you mind going in how you got over Mary? And I suppose, while not on the same level, saints at the same time, just because while they're not exactly the same, there's a lot of similarities between the two.
okay, Saints were easier for me to, in a sense, like get over because I felt like they were, I, we all have people that we aspire to. We all have
Hmm.
role models that we wish to look up to, and I definitely think that since we already have that idea from secular culture, and I think to an extent Protestantism, sort of has seminal figures that we all look up to or have been founders of different denominations, that there is already an unofficial like motivation or unofficial sainthood, I guess, in which we look to others for guidance on how we should live and what we should and shouldn't do.
Hmm.
So that was easier for me to get over. Mary, though, was a bit of a challenge. And I understand, and the way that it is still right now, I don't want to say doubts because that's not true.
Hmm.
But there's still lots of lingering
Reservations.
reservations, I guess, in that, well, realizing that Mary is, because I think what happens to us, especially Protestants are in who are in the process or thinking about it or moving into
Hmm.
Catholicism, is the outsized role that Mary seems to have in things like the Rosary, in
Hmm.
the Confiteor, in the you know, in the Nicene Creed.
Right.
And I think it's important to recognize the historical context of how involved Mary was and how much of a model she actually was for everybody.
Hmm.
And in that, a model for everybody in that she was one of the very, very few who took God's, charge without question, and she was able to endure the social stigma, which was unsaid in the Bible but understood to all,
Hmm.
about the fact that she had a kid with Joseph before she was married, and that was a huge no-no at the time. So, realizing that she probably had the ear of Jesus in a special way, as was defined by the Hebrew custom, of having the queen not necessarily be the wife of the king, as is tradition in the West, and the fact that she, is able to have the ear of Jesus in a very specific way. So, for example, the most notable example being the wedding at Cana, Jesus' first miracle.
Yes.
That she does hold a special place for everybody, but it is not worship because we are simply asking for her help rather than saying she's the greatest and she's the greatest and we don't really care about what else she did, kind of a thing. The veneration worship line is a very, very fine one to walk. And I think it's really important that we all have an idea of veneration, even though it means worship. It is synonymous with worship in common parlance today. That's not the case when it comes to the church. So
I would definitely say that's a good point, because it does, and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier, how sometimes Catholics can be a little bit off thrown by that too, because it can be a very fine line between the obvious respect that Mary does happen to deserve, and then sometimes people happening to seemingly go above and beyond in worshiping her. But in the end of the day, we do know that all power that Mary has is only through the grace of God, and in order to bring people back into the fullness of the church.
Of course, and it's something that the Immaculate Conception is through me, as it throws a lot of Protestants as well. In that she is accorded special status for this birth to happen. For me, what helped me at least be not so freaked out about that was simply saying that even though, because she is important, because this I guess it's a bit of a escape hatch, but I was basically able to get over by saying that this needed to happen, the sacrifice needed to happen. So God made it a one-time exception, or God made it so. I guess that probably isn't like the most 100%, don't want to say kosher, but 100% like proper way to view it. But that's the way that I've been able to think of it, and not, I guess, I'm no theologian, even though some people would think that I am, or would like to think that I am.
Some people probably would, because you do happen to know a lot more than some people. So exactly, I get that. Yes, that's good. So, yeah, I know that you did mention going back to history earlier, obviously, and noting that a lot of where the respect for Mary does come from throughout history, and then times where Mary revealed herself. I would assume that one of the big pieces, especially for the Rosary as well, specifically the Hail Mary in the Rosary, is the fact that I believe the majority, if not like nearly 80 to 100%, or 80, probably about 80% of the Hail Mary actually comes from, passages in the Bible.
Right, and that would be what the angel said to Mary. What this angel said to Mary in the first place. Yes,
I was going to say that I believe that the second line comes from Elizabeth. Is that correct? If I remember correctly.
I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure on that one, to be honest. So.
No, that's fair. If I'm just remembering correctly, but I know that the majority comes from that. But I was going to say, no. And then I know that you said you didn't really have any saints in particular that saints weren't that big of a threshold. But I suppose if they were a threshold for you, is there any advice that you could give to some people, or particular saints aside, including Paul actually, that you would inspire people to look at? Because I know that St. Paul is a very big one, as is Aquinas, and I know the last one, but I'm blanking on his name, even though I'm reading his book at the moment. Augustine.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry. So yeah,
I would say that if you're having problems with I guess the issue, I think, it really comes back down to the veneration versus worship distinction. I think that a lot of people in my opinion, it really comes back to that, because most people would not have an issue when it comes to respecting respecting or asking for intercession. So when Catholics are asking or praying to a saint, they're merely asking for that saint to intercede, to intercede with others in heaven at the time, to pray to God. So it's not. I know it's a very difficult thing to think about because there's not really because when we Protestants mainly ask others to pray, we just ask others, which we can see, to pray for us, and it's much more difficult to conceptualize that. And excuse me,
no problem.
I think I've been developing the hiccups here. Excuse me.
You're fine. Don't worry about it.
And I realize that that's not a immediate thing, because it's very easy for us to think of it in terms of, well, they're up there in heaven, they don't really care about us except for God, they've done their share. But no, that's not how it's not how the saints or the people up there think. You're merely asking, drawing upon what they've done as inspiration for you to move forward. Is how I've been able to think of it.
I could definitely see that, because it's like, even though they're up there, the fact that they're up there would make them want to pray for us, for God's intercession, even harder, I suppose. Mainly due to the fact, obviously, that they get to see the fullness of God's love. And that's what heaven and the second earth is going to be. It's going to be fully in the fullness of God's love. So, obviously, there is a precedence that they would still want to pray for us, I suppose.
Yes.
I was going to say, as well as, I guess we'll move on to another subject that you may have had some trouble with, or as well as the souls in purgatory. I know that, obviously, unfortunately, while it is biblical, it may not appear that way to some Protestants due to the fact that, unfortunately, when Martin Luther did split off from the Catholic Church and caused that schism, and then happened to, from there, and he didn't make sect after sect of Protestant churches. I believe we're up to 10,000 now in the United States, by the way, if I'm remembering correctly.
I haven't checked, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, but either way, when Martin Luther left, he obviously took 7 books out, which basically he took out 7 books that kind of proved that he was wrong, in a sense. Because I was going to say, in Maccabees 2, it does happen to have a little bit of mention of purgatory, as well as, I believe it is it's either Acts or one of Paul's letters, and you may be able to remind me of which one it is exactly, because I'm having troubles remembering at the moment, unfortunately.
This is one of the issues about doing this as a live take rather than having a script, is that we're not all ready to cite to blue book everything that we say here. So, let me see. I'm not as familiar with the Apocrypha as I should be. I will say that. So, from the Protestants' perspective, things like Maccabees and those, and
right.
Paul.
I was going to say, from the Protestants' perspective, the extra books, even though
Yes.
which is a very common misconception. And I'm not saying this against you, obviously. Very common misconception is that the Catholics added 7 books, even though obviously that does not happen to be the case. But I suppose that the biggest question: how did you happen to get over? I would suppose I would put it as a fear of purgatory, I guess, if that makes sense. Or
Purgatory was
go ahead.
Purgatory was explained to me as a period of cleansing, of preparation, of entering into heaven, not necessarily as a bad thing. Not necessarily as a bad thing. Purgatory for me was, one of those things where, if honestly, this may be just the dumb, blissful ignorance on my part, but if I lived according to how Jesus would want us to live in accordance with the faith, then if it happens, it happens. For me, because I can't control that. Only God knows how how that would work. If I just continue to live out the faith here, then as it happens, it happens, I guess. I've never. You can't worry too much about what happens in the future if it really is out of your control. If it is, I mean, sorry, this is a bit of a fallacious argument that I was trying to make here. You can't. You can only do. You can only do your part right now, and if you've lived your life to the best of your ability, as as the Bible and as the church teaches, and as the faith teaches, then that's it. That's why I haven't really been afraid of purgatory per se.
Mm-hmm.
I maybe my naivete here speaking, but I just felt like, and I've been thinking that you just do what you can here, and if it happens, it happens, and God has His will.
And
so
I may have misspoken on that one, honestly. I
Yes.
suppose coming to acceptance of purgatory probably would have been better one, because I know that can be a problem for some people. You're absolutely right. Purgatory isn't honestly something to be scared of. It's just something that, as we get cleansed, we get closer to God. So you're exactly right. That was not honestly the best way that I could have phrased that. So I just came to be more understanding of purgatory. May have been a better way to put that. So I apologize.
I always had understood the Catholic Church to that purgatory was a thing in the church. I guess I really never had problems with it, because from my perspective is that we ended up in heaven at the end anyway. So I guess I'm not the best person to be asking on how to come to terms with purgatory. Sure. I guess,
and that's fair.
So and maybe it's because that I had always I had always sort of had a problem with the Protestant idea that, sola fide and then you're done, kind of a thing. And I don't want to sound like it's because I like things. I don't want to say it's because I view life as something like a Tough Mudder or something like that, or some kind of obstacle race that you have to go out and like earn your way into the church or earn your way into salvation. But to say, to say one thing and then have that be it, that's always been a bit of a disconnect for me, and it may be one that I probably maybe misunderstood, but honestly, I just didn't have much of an issue with it, to be honest. So
no, I can understand that, because I think you're exactly right, because I think a lot of people, especially, and this isn't to pick on the Calvinists, even though obviously we disagree with them, the fact that they think that God predestines people to hell or to heaven kind of happens to go very much so against the fullness of love that God is, because that's what God is. God is love. Otherwise, He wouldn't have given us His only Son. And, that way we wouldn't happen to be dead forever, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I think I get where you're coming from with that, honestly.
Yeah, for me, Calvinism, I guess I don't understand how the Calvinists kind of arrived at what they did is my question. When it comes to like the elect, I just don't see how an organization, how that could realistically happen, given the fact that the church was never meant to be confined to any particular group, even though that may not be what some people may believe. I just don't see how it was supposed to be, specifically contained to one person or another. So
right,
and
I would say
heaven.
Go ahead.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, you go first.
Heaven was not supposed to be something that, if we were all created in the image of God, then I don't see how that is compatible with that. So
right, and I was going to say, I would say especially in relation to Sirach 15, and I'm just trying to find that passage real quickly, because Sirach 15 kind of disproves Calvinism a little bit as well, but I have an older version of the Bible down here. My newer version, which calls it Sirach, is upstairs, so I have to. Yeah, so I was gonna say the Douay Rheims version that I have at the moment is not exactly. It's not a bad translation. It's just if I'm looking for something.
Don't tell the rad trads that. So.
Yeah. I enjoy it. I just don't happen to have, obviously, Proverbs isn't Sirach, although I know Proverbs isn't Sirach. It might be Ecclesiastes, but anyways, I was gonna say no.
Ecclesiastes.
Wait,
is there Ecclesiastes? Sir?
It might be Canticle of Canticles is what I'm looking for, because Nope. I am just not sure now. So basically, I was going to say, while I am still trying to find this, why don't I could just look online? Why don't I basically go ahead and happen to go ahead? I know that one of the people I was talking with mentioned very much so that she happened to believe that, well, praying to God is praying to God, so I don't really need a middleman with confession or, priest in general. So I did hear you mention that a little bit earlier. Would you mind going into that?
Sure, with confession. In the early days of the church, sins were not mainly done. One confessed sins not by simply just talking to God. One confessed sins by actually proclaiming them in front of the whole congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it was not, because the idea is that in sinning, you've not only sinned against God, but you've sinned against others in doing so. And if we look at the practices in the epistles to the churches, is that there is very clear that if someone has done wrong, it's not only a matter of, I just saying sorry to God. You would have to explain yourself, explain what had gone wrong and how you intend to change to everybody. But as obviously congregations grew, this would be an all-day affair if this practice still existed today. So confession, I actually, as the priest sits, it sits in the person of Christ, and also by virtue of that through congregation, I feel like it's a good, it's an emotional weight, I guess, and realize that there's a lot of closure in speaking to God on the matter too. I'm not blind to that, having been a Protestant myself. But the fact is that even if you are, even just saying something to your priest is a lot more effective than simply wondering whether someone's on the other side. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. So
and
go ahead.
Yeah, and doing that is powerful, because you kind of is not only because oftentimes the priest will oftentimes advise you on how to work on that. I know not all priests are the best at that, because I've been to certain confessions where it's been I would explain my sin, and then it'd be like oh, okay, my son, okay, my son, 5 Hail Marys and go,
right.
kind of a thing. Your sins are forgiven. But in my main parish, there's it's really, if you do have the opportunity to actually, I know it may be terrifying at first to do a face-to-face confession with your priest, and you really explain what has been bothering you or what sins you've been struggling with. That's very, very therapeutic to be able to at least say, to somebody who is bound to have made an oath before God to never reveal anything about what you have said, and to talk to a man who has heard everything, honestly, unless, I don't know, I'm not going to, because even to somebody like any priest will hear confession had he been around to give it. They are that considerate. They're that considerate and that willing to listen. Which is a lot more that can be said than a lot of other people out there.
Yes, so. I was gonna say, especially because I know that it is biblical, obviously, that pardon me, where confession comes from. I would just have to, unfortunately, remember the passages, which is. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Ugh. Sorry. So I was gonna say that's the hardest part that I've been having, honestly, is remembering the Bible. Since I guess I'd say I'm in a partially similar boat to you, since I've just recently stopped being a cafeteria Catholic within the past year, actually, and I've started actually taking my faith seriously. So that has caused a little bit of tension between my wife and I, not intentionally. It's just we've almost been together now for 7 years, and after having been used to somebody for 6 years, and her herself just having converted 2 years ago, it happens to be a little bit of a shock to her. But obviously it's in a good way, I suppose, due to the fact that obviously I'm happier now since I've been getting closer to God, and I hope that she eventually happens to start taking her faith more seriously, as I know that, as I said, it is biblical where confession comes from, and I know we won't bring up the person or this particular story because that would be while we're not priests ourselves, I still would feel uncomfortable sharing confessional stories. I know that you have a person that you know that recently, for their penance, they had to do a rosary. So obviously, there is still priests that do give out appropriate penances. It's just some priests happen to be a little bit more lenient, and some priests happen to be a little bit more unique. Because I was gonna say, I know that one of the times that mine was, I can't remember what it was exactly, but I was told I needed to just go out and appreciate God's beauty more. And this is particularly during fall, where I was supposed to go out for like an hour and just observe everything around me and bask in God's glory. So,
Hmm. I know I've received, I think I can definitely relate to that because, I think that for some sins that may be not so egregious, I suppose, but are definitely so in in church teachings, and especially one for those that are some priests may see that they have bigger fishes to fry, so to say. You know what I mean? So, especially with one that is very common to young men. I won't go into specifics on that front because I'm guessing that the majority of our audience can figure out what that is.
I was gonna say, I would fully admit that I have had a problem with what you're talking about. Honestly, we still won't go into it, but that was definitely one of my biggest vices for years, and even today, it's been.
Yes.
I think it's been about 230 days since I did happen to last partake in that act, but it's still.
But getting back to the issue
ahead.
is that I was in confession for that, and
Yes.
the priest said, "Well, I wouldn't worry about that too much. Your sins are forgiven." I was like, "Huh?
Right.
Wait a second, what?" So, and I think part of that may be because if you do go to confession regularly, you're not saying things like, I don't want to say that that's, I guess the overall like certain demographics of what the priest is accustomed to may play into that, I suppose, because I know that there was the priest that heard my friend's confession. It was right before Latin Mass, and the priest was a member of the Priestly Society of St. Peter. So people who would attend a Latin Mass generally aren't going into the confessional with the sins that my friend would have gone into, I guess, or would be at least more cognizant of what those sins were. And I guess, do you understand what I'm saying? Is that may play a role into it as well, but
I think so.
And there, even though things are more controlled than Protestant denominations, there is still that variance in terms of the priest's discretion, which I understand is a bit of an issue for some. So
right, but I definitely think I get where you're coming from. Where it's like, yeah, it can definitely depend, especially if the priest knows you, I suppose. Because as you said, you don't have to be behind the screen. I for one do not do behind the screen. I know that some people happen to prefer it. My mother, as much as I love her and God bless her, she does happen to be a very much so cafeteria Catholic, and I cannot convince her for the life of me to go to confession. And that honestly, as I said, I'm not judging her. I just happen to be more worried for her since we are supposed to go to confession at least once a year, if I remember correctly.
Well, I think part of it, maybe I'm finding this out myself, is that sometimes you have to go to different parishes if you want to fit it into your schedule, I guess. You have to, until you can like really settle down and figure out, okay, when can I consistently try to make confession? It's a struggle I know that I've been dealing with that right now because I'm at my summer internship right now, and it's a bit of a mess because I'm still have yet to settle into a parish right now. So I'm still like trying to figure out, with I'm in Los Angeles for full disclosure, so it's with LA traffic. Maybe if I might be able to make like a 7:30 confession, on a Thursday night or a Friday night, and I have things to do in the evening too. So definitely that does pose a legitimate problem for some people. I'm not saying that there's no excuse, but just as to sympathize with why some people may feel very, very uneasy about that.
Yes, I can definitely understand that. You need to find something to find your schedule. A little bit funny since we're on that. I know that I've talked with you that Katie and I have been discussing moving to Savannah, Georgia, and the really weird thing is, somebody mentioned this on Reddit, that since obviously Georgia does happen to be in the Bible Belt, so there's not nearly as many Catholics as there is where I currently am. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that the fact is you have to be more knowledgeable, I suppose, and you can't really be a cafeteria Catholic as easily. So basically, I found it really weird that there was a few churches down there that happened to off, and actually a good thing, mind you, that there was a couple of churches that offered confession multiple times a week, as opposed to just that one, hopefully an hour, possibly less on Saturday or Sunday. So those really rare times, as you were talking about.
Yes. I would say that currently the especially amongst people who are the differences between the animosities between the denominations are slowly fading, especially
Mhm.
as secularism and modernism becomes more and more of a pervasive issue that affects all denominations.
Yes, that's very true.
So,
Which I mean, it's
I mean, I'm not, it's important that, the United States government was founded on secular principles, et cetera, et
right,
cetera,
but
et cetera.
exactly.
You know,
But I would definitely say there's a possibility it may go. It has gone too far in some cases.
yes. I think we all can agree on that, at least. I think
Yeah.
you're going to find a lot more accommodation than what used to historically happen in like 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, and I was
So,
gonna say even longer than that because I was gonna say I know that originally, and not many people know this. One of the original reasons for the KKK was, aside obviously from black people, was to get Catholics as well and kill them.
yes. Because Catholics at the time were an other, so
Yes,
the Klan was very much opposed to the idea of the other coming in. So,
exactly. And, and not to the same extent, but Catholic. That was part of the reason why Knights of Columbus were founded as well, actually, due to the fact that Catholics could not happen to get a good job. So typically, they were jobs where Catholics died at an early age. So it happened to put wives into a very not good situation, especially when they had children, due to the fact that, well, your husband died and you don't have any way to make income now, so you're kind of out of luck. And that's what the original point of the Knights of Columbus was for, to help people in that situation.
mhm.
But I was going to say, is there any other major things that you would have happened to, had some problems with when you were?
Transubstantiation was not a big issue for
Okay,
me.
that's a good one.
My father already believed in it, so that wasn't a issue, I
Hmm.
guess.
Hmm.
So, um, I guess I don't know. The problem is I've been comfortable with the idea for so long. I can't even explain how one would get over it. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, you're fine. I was gonna say you've honestly
So,
happened to come to helped with a lot of things so far. I was gonna say, I think we could definitely touch upon confession a little bit more, but not quite yet. I'm still, if you have anything else about your childhood that really happened to struck out to you, possibly when you really decided. I don't know if you really did. A lot of people happen to have a moment when they decided to, follow Jesus entirely. So I was just, I guess, curious. That way we could.
so I guess like I had never considered the possibility of like, not being Christian, so that sort
Sure.
of throws a spanner in the wrench of there being a
Mhm.
this moment. But I think it was the idea that I just felt kind of lonely, I guess, and isolated in Blooming, where I was going to undergrad, and I just was really concerned with like how fragmented my church was,
Mhm.
and they're just longing for a sense that maybe, not to say that church politics doesn't happen in Catholic churches either, but just longing for the hope that you know that things wouldn't continue to be split apart anymore. I guess
Right.
I'm seeking a far more deeper and richer tradition than just here's this church I went to for the past 15 years, and it what it says is what the pastor says goes.
Hmm.
That's not. I just felt very uncomfortable with that.
Kind of basically, I suppose, how there was one person who could make all the rules, but they didn't really have the reason why to make the rules. Would that be a fair statement, or?
Yeah, I just felt that what I just felt that it was important to realize that ultimately we should really, tradition is not a bad thing, and we shouldn't be trying to reinvent the wheel. I guess I also owed the Catholic Church a great debt because they were the ones that actually codified music. I was a music major in undergrad, so and I just was really drawn as a really by California standards, especially as basically alt right, obviously,
right.
So I just felt that it was important to really get in touch with the tradition, with what was originally there. I guess what originally was what the faith was, and the roots behind it. So
I suppose that you didn't have much of a problem then with the papacy as well as tradition, but
the papacy for me, I understand that the whole idea of a pope is an issue, but realistically speaking, and I'm not thinking to minimize the issue, but when you have churches that are run by charismatic pastors, especially, and what they say goes, how is that not in effect the same thing? Is my question. So,
right,
I know the papacy kind of forces itself against the heart of what America is, us as Americans are taught, and are the idea that things like in Berlin, the American flag bows to no earthly king, things like that, or the distrust that we have of despots, which is or of a foreign despot, or seemingly, but considering that one of the misconceptions is that what the Pope says goes, and what Catholics, that's not true. Papal infallibility only really applies when the Pope is speaking ex cathedra, I believe the term is, right?
I believe so.
So
I think
and in consultation with the College of Cardinals. So it's not an issue of one man can simply say something and it happens. That's not really how it works. And I think education on the matter is important to realize that doing something, that the idea that the Pope says something, and the Pope writes a treatise on climate change, and everyone's like, oh my goodness, we should all do it. That's not what really happens out here.
Right, because I'm if I'm remembering correctly, in the last 1,000 years, I think papal infallibility has only been used 2 times, if I'm happening to remember correctly. I may not be.
With the dogmas, right? Basically.
Yes, I believe so. Yes, it's not used honestly terribly frequently, and popes can have own personal opinions that don't always agree with the church, just as long as they don't happen to try to make them into a fact.
Yes.
So that really happens to be the main factor there. If they're, teaching it as opinion like Galileo should have done, but that is a story for another time. And, I was going to say, so yeah, you didn't really have much problem then with papal infallibility or tradition. Then.
I did at first, but then I learned more, and I was like, oh, well, if that's the case, then it's not so evil as some people seem to make it. So
right, and especially once you look in the Bible and you do see, hey, yeah, Jesus did, mention the Pope, but not specifically, but he did mention it a few times. And I was going to say, I would definitely assume that one passage in Revelation has been very misused today about Rome as the whole.
I mean, you can look at any single passage of the Bible and consider and warp it into whatever you want to. I mean, I've seen things like Nazis trying to justify why Catholicism is the true religion of Nazis, and why Hitler, and why Hitler was really a Catholic, and
right. Which I mean, to be partially fair, while he was Catholic, he was not obviously a practicing Catholic.
Yes, there is that distinction that people don't make.
Yeah, I was gonna say people ignore all the time.
So
you're exactly right. No, I was gonna say, what was it that you said before the Nazis part? I was gonna say one other thing and then I totally forgot it now. That's all right. If we can't remember it, that is fine. Yes, I was gonna say how basically Rome is the whore of Babylon, if I remember correctly, which.
No.
At the time, that is correct when it was written. While Rome was the whore of Babylon at the time, they're talking about the original Roman Empire. They're not kind of talking about today's Rome. It's vastly different. If you guys are, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe Paul of Tarsus happens to talk about that, and it happened. Paul of Tarsus, I recommend as well if people are interested about Saint Paul, honestly, because there's a lot of interesting information there. But
I mean, it would be the same thing as people as reading something like the Federalist Papers and talking about and seeing something in there about how treaties shall be made with the Indian tribes and saying, aha, therefore, Congress has like the power to it's looking at an outdated statement or where the situation had not changed at the time, or a pronouncement that had not changed. It's like, or looking at old maps and saying, because of this map, the western border of the United States must be the Appalachians.
Right. So kind of,
So,
I think one of my favorite gifts of that, I don't know if you've seen it, is where basically this one woman does a Google search, and the Google search turns into a man, and the man's like, I found 99% of these Google reports where where vaccines don't happen to do anything to your children that's bad, and this one single report that does show it. It's like, I knew it. It's like
Wakefield wasn't leaked with the trial attorney said bar anyway, and he was looking to make a quick buck.
Right.
So, and for some reason that's stuck.
Yeah.
So
I don't know why it has. I was gonna say I do want to do that. Give my kids vaccines mostly. There's a few vaccines that I would rather alternatives for, just because some of them are made from aborted fetuses. So.
Where did you get that one from?
I'd have to fix my old hard drive and give you the website. There's a few of them, though, but I would have to get you... It's been nearly a year at this point, Michael, but it should be on my old computer's hard drive. Let me get that fixed, and I'll get that for you.
Okay.
But I was going to say, aside from that, I know that there's not anything wrong with vaccines, and the only reason why it's mainly a problem in the United States is because we don't happen to have any easy alternatives. So, like, instead of using one part of the antibiotics, it's that. But that's not really what we're here for today. Although, I suppose that we could bring that up to the ends don't justify the means, but that might be a topic for another time, honestly. So I was going to say, what else? Yeah, but you basically said that tradition really wasn't a big problem for you, right?
No, it really wasn't, and I guess that just comes to part of my nature, as I guess I could be judged as overly naive, or perhaps taken in by the pomp and ceremony of the church, and I respect those criticisms, but realistically, all things considered, it wasn't that big of a transition, to be honest. So, and a lot of it really comes down to looking at actually realizing that there's a lot of thought behind everything the church says and has done. And this is not something, even though there were parts of it, of the church's history, where it was, very much a socioeconomic powerhouse in and of its own right, and did seek to, maintain its control in that manner. A lot of what is said and what it does is very much rooted, and there's been apologetics going back hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of years on these topics. A lot of the critiques are not new, and that really helps, So,
which that's true. I could definitely see that. So we're going to go back to saints for a minute, just because I'm curious. Which saint, I suppose, would be one that you happen to really admire? I was going to say, it could be your confirmation saint. I kind of...
my confirmation saint was Sir Thomas More, actually.
Oh, was it? I was going to say.
Yeah.
That is an interesting one for a lot of points, but it's also interesting for a different point. Did you actually know that for some bizarre reason, Thomas More is also a saint in the Anglican Church?
Yes, I did know that.
Yeah, which is kind of a little weird. I mean, just a little bit, but yeah, I was gonna say. So, is there anything else that you would like to happen to talk about, honestly, that you think might happen to help any people? Because, as I said, since I never was Protestant, I can't, say these things happen to be not something that I was fully comfortable with initially.
I would say the first thing that you need to really ask yourself is, for all the Protestants out there, is to really think about why do you believe what do you believe? And obviously, this, even as a fairly easy transition, it still took me about 2 years, 2.5 years for me to really make the full switch. And so pray about it a lot, think about it a lot, ask as many people as you can on the topic, because the reason why I switched, I was able to form a positive view of Catholicism at first, was because I had a friend who was able to talk me through it. That friend is now actually going to be a priest he's going to seminary actually in a few months.
Congratulations to him then.
Yeah, I was like, he was in business school, and he was just like, "What are you doing in business school? You're too optimistic for business school."
Right.
So,
No, I can definitely understand that then. Yeah.
So just ask questions, read as much as you can, give it some serious thought, and don't, and there's no pressure to be rash on the subject. So, because especially when your soul is concerned. So.
No, that's true. I was going to say, well, obviously, we would like you to come to the fullness of Christ. We don't want you to happen to do it haphazardly, I suppose would be a good way to say that.
Or at the point of a sword. So.
No, I don't really want to bring politics into this, but we don't want to do like the Muslims do. No offense to any Muslims that watch this, and more so,
or they once did. Let's put it that way.
Yes, or like they still do, but not to the same extent. I would like to add this one small caveat, so I'm not totally offending people. Islam is not a peaceful religion, but there is obviously very much so. The majority are peaceful Muslims.
And moderating elements within it.
Moderating elements too. I was going to say the other part is, well, Christianity is a peaceful religion. There is, unfortunately, moderating elements again, as well as warmongering Christians, which is a shame, honestly.
But you're going to find those on the internet more so than in real life. So I can tell you that.
Yeah,
so
that is true.
So
that is a very good point. So I was going to say, well, if you don't have anything else as of this moment, at the very least, Michael.
Not really. Not really at this time. So.
Would you be interested in possibly joining another time if people do happen to come with some questions, or if there's some other Protestants that we could pick some brains with at the same time?
Of course. I would have to check my time commitments.
Right. I was going to say we
rapidly shrinking again. So
we would find a time. Don't worry. I would make sure that it would work, and I would not happen to fall asleep this time after I said I would take a nap.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so. I was going to say, I really appreciate you coming here. I hope that, I'm sure it will, honestly, that the words that you've said today will happen to help people to come to the fullness of Christ and Catholicism, and help them with a couple of the misconceptions that people happen to have about the church.
Sure. As a follow-up, if you are watching, one of the best places that look, obviously, the Catechism of the Catholic Church is one good place to look. It's available online for free. Don't feel obligated to buy one. Catholic Answers is also another great place that you can go to take a look at commonly asked questions. And of course, don't be afraid to ask questions to your own faith leaders, your own religious leaders. And most priests would be more than happy to set up an appointment with you if you do have the means to travel to a Catholic church.
Yes.
So
that's a very true statement. Most priests are more than willing to happen to talk with people, and as long as they happen to be somebody that was serious in their faith, should honestly be able to help you as well. While we're on the subject of Catholic Answers, I would definitely happen to second that. Two in particular that I happen to enjoy just because they're so knowledgeable and super nice. All the people on Catholic Answers are really good, but Jimmy Akin and Trent Horn are two I would recommend. So, all right. I think that would pretty much wrap it up for this session. Would you agree, Michael?
All right. That's. I think that I'm out for the night, but thank you very much for everybody for sticking around.
Yes, we very much so appreciate. We make sure that we all hope you have a wonderful day, and we will obviously still be recording with Michael over on those Catholic gaming commentaries. As you heard, he is a little bit busy on occasion, but we will definitely make sure so as to get him in there whenever he does happen to have that free time. Thank you for joining us today, Michael. I do appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, everyone, you make sure that you all have a wonderful night, and God bless.